Today's video, many of you have been asking for, many of you have been wondering why I have this box in the corner, and more importantly, what's in the box? What am I going to do with it? Well, today we're going to find out. For those of you that are new here, my name is Jake Kaminski. I'm a two-time Olympic silver medalist in the sport of archery, and we're going to make this channel a great resource to all types of archery. So if you haven't yet, hit that subscription button and the notification bell. That way you're notified every time a new video is uploaded. I'd appreciate it. Alright, so big thank you to one of my Patreon supporters. They reached out to me, said they were purchasing one of these risers, and wanted to get my feedback and wanted to give me the opportunity of putting my hands on one of these risers. And I'm excited to finally do so. It's my very first actual Barebow production riser that I can put my hands on. So this is the Gillo GT 27 inch, and it's the ILF recurve. And it's a beaut. It's definitely something that is really, really well built. And there are a lot of really nice things that are on this bow. And, you know, I'm proud to know who this individual is on a personal level. I've hung out with Frangeli, Michele, numerous times, hung out and had good times, discussed things, discussed tuning, setups, all sorts of stuff. Lucky enough to talk to him, and lucky enough to talk to his father, Vittorio, as well. And just basically be able to pick their brains when Gillo was first starting, you know, when they had their very first bow production. And I'm glad to see that they have actually carved out a niche of the market for themselves. They make a really good riser, really good equipment, good components, and they know what they're doing. So I was happy to see them be successful, and I'm happy to be able to review their stuff as well. So in the box, you know, a bit about Michele and his history, a nice wristband, looks like a catalog of what they offer, their warranties. It's their manual basically showing you how to adjust the limbs, because the limb pockets are pretty cool. There's like a 30% variance in poundage or something like that, which is crazy. So we're going to do some testing and basically see what's up with the actual bow itself. See if it's any confusing to me compared to anything else, because I've aligned one of these bows before, but I've not actually set it up, adjusted it, checked the alignment, and done some other things like that. So I'm gonna do a bit of testing today and see what I see as far as alignment goes, and if the alignment changes throughout the weight variance, because that's such a huge change compared to any other bow out there. So I definitely want to test that out and see how that goes. Yeah, I mean, they've got nice recommendations of brace heights, giving you references to websites and all sorts of stuff. Pretty basic manual, but a lot of good information in it. You got a nice sticker as well, and then your typical hardware bag with Allen wrenches, extra screws, which are nice to see. Looks like extra locking bolts, your clicker plate extension, your basic stuff that comes with just about every bow. But it's nice to see some extra screws. Looks like some extra grip screws, maybe clicker mounting screws, clicker plate screws, things like that. So it's nice to see some extra hardware come with the bows, because especially on these small hardware, on this small hardware that you do adjustments on the limb alignment and things like that, you can round the heads out on the bolts themselves, so it's fairly easy to do. So I'm glad to see some extra hardware. And just so you know, people, when you say you stripped a screw, that's not rounding the head off. That's not rounding the hex and making that turn round. That's just rounding the head off. Stripping them is actually breaking the threads off of either the bolt or ripping the threads out of the internal section of the riser. Very rarely do I see people actually stripping stuff on their bow, but I see them rounding the heads on the Allen wrenches all the time. Let's unveil the color. It's a nice color. I probably would have chose this color too myself. It is the red and the black. I like that they have a really nice finish on it. I like the dull anodizing. It looks like they must either shot peen it, blast it, tumble it, something, and then they anodize it to give it this dull sheen. I like the dull because, you know, when you're shooting in the bright sun, you really will never get a direct glare off of the riser. Like even with my bright lights on my camera, there's no glare. It just is bright, which is great to see. The grip feels great. This grip actually reminds me of an old Loesch grip. They used to make them all the time, and with colored layers of different types of wood, and then they'd shape them. And this is a really, really nice grip. Probably one of my favorite grips, factory stock, that I've ever put my hands on. It's flat this direction, which I am a fan of. A lot of the other higher performance type grips will have a slope this direction. I don't like that. I can't the bow too far to the right when it's sloped that way. So I'm glad to see that it's flat. I like that it's relatively low wrist. That's a good starting point. It's got nice sharp edges on the left. It's maybe a little oversized towards the inside, and I think, just in my opinion, it's a little oversized on this section here. You'll see right through here, it's got like some extra material sticking out past the riser. It's comfortable, don't get me wrong. It's not bad. There's nothing in the way. I would shave this out of the way a little bit, and I might tuck this in a little bit more for my own personal feeling. Like I said, this is the best grip by far, but I've never put my hand in a grip and said, yeah, that's exactly what I want. I always want to change them just a little bit. So this isn't a detriment to this grip or bow manufacturer at all. Yeah, I feel, like I said, I would cut that in just a little bit, but the rest of the grip is amazing. It's great. It's wood, which is great because you have the ability to shape the grip in all directions in many ways without having to fill a cavity pocket behind it. Like in many of the plastic grips out there, the section in the center where it's elevated and raised has a pocket in it, so they don't have to put so much plastic material into the injection mold itself, save costs on material. But what that means is you can't cut it down very low and flat without opening up that cavity, so you have to worry about filling it or getting yourself a wood grip and then not having that issue. So it's nice to see that they made it out of wood, and we can do anything we want to this grip without any sort of negatives, basically. The hardware all looks quite nice. I see a little bit of residue around the limb bolts themselves from when they put in thread locker, I would assume, and then they just wipe up the excess, and it doesn't want to come off. It's probably embedded in the little bit of roughness on the surface. Nothing, no big deal, just something to note. Something I'm interested in, want to see, and we'll find out in this testing, is how much this little rubber ball thing stays in contact when it's all the way out. I haven't seen one all the way out in person, or at least asked somebody how far out their limb bolts were. So I'm interested in seeing how that looks, just out of curiosity. It looks like it's got a brass limb dovetail insert. Personally, I would have gone with something a little harder than that. Maybe they have a reason about having the brass insert here. The reason I would go with something harder is I know brass is really soft. And if you're going to own a riser for 10 years or something like that, I would hate for the groove in here to be worn out from you putting your limb in and out, in and out, in and out, and then the shock and the vibration of shooting that arrow. So I would like to see a harder material there, but like I said, they may have a reason for going with brass. Brass is really dense anyway, so putting steel out here wouldn't even be as much weight as that. It's got these nice pockets here for the disc weights you can mount for the Barebow style. It's got that pocket where you can clamp on that bolt-on clamp. I guess that's what the extra hardware is for these holes here, as well as the clicker plate holes, or the clicker plate holes, and then the clicker itself. One thing to note that I'm not a big fan of is the feel of the riser. I don't have sensory issues on touch, so it's not bothering me too much. If you have sensory issues like touching certain things, and I know some people do, like I know somebody that does, and I had them touch the riser and see what they thought, and they were like, oh, I can't touch that riser, I can't do that, because it's just got this feel to it. It's got like a soft touch feel similar to what you'd find in a high-end automobile. You know, that rubberized soft touch feel that they put on like all the plastic parts, all the door handles and things like that. So it's got that kind of feel, but it's a little more rough than that. And obviously it's metal, so it's cold. So that is something interesting that I'm finding. The machining on it looks great. Minor tool marks in some areas, but nothing goofy by any means. I don't see any real issues at all. I mean, this is a pretty solid looking piece. So again, this is a 27-inch riser. I had to get a long string made for this. So I'll review the string manufacturer and review the string as well in another video coming up. Something that looks pretty cool is it looks like the limb bolt doesn't move out. This pocket pivots along with the limb bolt as well. And obviously, I believe the way that this system works is the limb bolt stays flat against the riser because the bushing in here allows the bolt to be pivoting along with the limbs themselves. So that's pretty cool. Like I said, so far, best grip I've ever seen on a factory production bow. I'm happy about that. I'd make very minor adjustments. I'd fill in this little gap here with some putty, take some material off here, and probably shoot it as is. I think it'd be great for a barebow shooter because it's low wrist. So when you're getting into those deep crawls, your bow's not feeling like it's trying to pull you up and really having a hard time being at full draw. So this looks great. So I'm going to get some limbs on it. I'm going to throw these win-and-win limbs on it. These are the MXT GWs. So these are the newest limbs that are wood. I have the foam ones on my my other win-and-win, the ATF-X. So we'll see how these things fit in. Snaps in pretty good. A way that you can check the limb fitment in the limb bolt here is to put the limb in upside down so the detent doesn't make contact in here. And you feel it's nice and snug. There's no play, but it's not overly tight. So their tolerances are pretty good, in my opinion. This is the upper. Let's do the check on the lower. Yeah, similar. Great. I like it. See no issues. This is a long bow. I haven't shot a 72-inch bow in a long time. Like I said, I had to order a string because I don't have any strings for 72-inch bows. I have strings for 70-inch bows and some other sizes, but not 72 anymore. So I'll have to tie knocking points on this string and do some other things. I'll give a good review of this string after I shoot it for a little bit. And then hopefully I'll be able to recommend places where you can get some strings built. So I know what I would like to run as a brace height, but I want to see what they recommend on a 27-inch bow, ILF with long limbs, 8 3/4 to 9.5. I was gonna set it right at 9. It's interesting to see that the GT riser has less deflex. The G1, G2, and GQ risers have 5 millimeters more of deflex than the GT. That's pretty interesting. I would be interested in learning why. Maybe that had to do with setting the limb bolts and being so adjustable. I don't know. Just curious. And they're talking about standard curved limbs, which are great because many companies don't include information for, your exotic type limbs like a border or a Uka limb. So it's nice to see that they're referencing that these brace heights are for standard limbs. And they also said as standard limb pocket angle. So as it comes from the factory, just like this, at 15 degrees. I'd be interested to see how we can measure that. That's nice. It's nice that they have included a lot more information that are not exclusive to their brand. Because let's be honest, not everybody shoots the same riser and same limbs. It's nice to see a company saying, hey, you use this limb, try this, that limb, try this. It's nice. It's nice to see. I don't see that anywhere else. So I'm going to be working on doing some preliminary setup on this riser. And then, taking some basics. And as I'm going along through this process, you'll be able to follow along and see what's going on and see if I stumble on anything that, is an interesting find. So I'll be taking some stuff off of my other bow and strapping it on this bow, doing limb alignment. I want to check some bow weight and things like that. To make sure that I am pretty similar on my other setups. Man, I'm real low on my brace height. I'm only at 8 3/4. I guessed on my string length, and it looks like I'm actually fairly close. Now the sound's changing. There's my 9-inch. It actually sounded better lower to me. So something to note that I'm seeing already is when I measure my brace height like this, from the pivot point of the grip to the center of the string, I'm at 8 and 31/32, just under 9 inches. A skosh under 9 inches. On this side, I'm maybe like 22.8 centimeters on that side. But when I hold it to the string using the same surface as my reference point to the center of the plunger button, I'm at about just over 8 7/8 inches. And I'm around 22.5, 22.6 centimeters. So what I'm seeing is this plunger hole is a few millimeters further forward than the pivot point of the grip. And what I have found in my testing and my experience with doing grip building is I found a relative need to have the pivot point of the grip equal to the plunger mounting point. The reason being is that as you torque the bow, depending on where that plunger is located, it can either magnify or reduce impact point on the target, depending on the torque you're inducing. And I can tell you that the plunger being further forward of the grip can have a negative impact. It's nice to see most bows have the pivot point and the plunger hole location vertically above each other. They might have a reason to this. It might be a variance in the grip because not all grips are made the same. These are made out of wood, probably by machines, but still would be preferred to see the pivot point of the grip be centered over the plunger hole. I'll be able to do some testing and playing with that to see if it makes a difference or not. I really like the long sight window on the longer risers, especially the non-formula ones, because the formula ones, the limb bolts come down much further into the limb pocket or into the sight window, so it kind of shortens it back up again. But I really like having this long sight window, and I personally loved shooting 27-inch risers, and nice to be able to play with again. Top and bottom weight points for adding weights are centered on the riser, and this stabilizer bushing is offset a couple millimeters towards the left, opposite of the sight window, to basically help counteract the misbalance that a sight window, and especially if you're putting a sight bar on, puts against the bow. Those are things to note that are definitely different on this riser compared to many other risers. So many people always ask me, how do I align my limbs with this offset stabilizer bushing? And I'll show you how here in a second. It's not that difficult, quite simple, and easy to do. So I need to check a few things. I need to check my tiller, make sure that's pretty close before we get too much into aligning the bow. And then I'm going to align the bow and show you how I do it. The stabilizer bushing being misaligned and offset, because as we know, or as anybody has, if you've been following this channel at all, you'll know that I use my stabilizer as a reference when I'm aligning my limbs. So I'm happy to report you can still do it on these bows, just got to use the bottom limb bushing. So the tiller is even, brace height set how I like it. I'm just going to align the limbs and play with some settings, see what the draw weight is compared to the bow that I have been shooting, the Win & Win ATF-X, and set them similar, align the limbs there, and then we're going to take it through the brace height, or the limb bow range, and see how the limbs stay aligned, because I'm curious. I want to see what happens. Oh, if you're curious on some of the stuff that I'm using and the tools that I'm using to align my bow and set up my equipment, I'll have links in the description below to where you can find alignment blocks for your limbs, a bow scale that's actually a luggage scale, much more affordable than a bow scale, and some of the tools and things that I use throughout this process. Oh, I gotta remember to be careful with this riser because it is not mine. It's actually going to somebody else. So really, honestly, special thanks to the patron who lent the help. And if you are interested in becoming a Patreon supporter, please consider supporting my channel. There'll be links in the description below where you can find my Patreon and how you can become a patron and see the benefits of being one. Don't put the stabilizer weights in yet because I'm going to align the limbs first. So the way that I'm going to align it is I'm going to use this bottom limb, or this bottom stabilizer bushing. Let me make sure I'm putting in my straight stabilizer. No, this one's the crooked one. So the reason I use my the bottom stabilizer bushing, again, bottom stabilizer bushing on the bottom is centered into the center of the bow. So using this bottom one, you can still get a true center reference. On this riser, they do have some lines like this in the bottom limb pocket and the top limb pocket for references. But I find that you cover your string with it, so how do you know if you're perfectly centered? This magnifies any sort of misalignment, in my opinion. As long as the stabilizer bushings are in correct place and centered and not misaligned, they look great on this riser. So I don't see an issue there at all. And then clamping it in a bow vise on the stabilizer, so there's nothing touching the limbs. Get the thing tipped up. And I have to put it at quite an odd angle because the stabilizer bushing's angled down so far. So I have to be able to see it, see the stabilizer as a reference compared to where the limbs will be with the biter blocks. The biter block's on. We'll see where we're at to start. I haven't touched this at all. So if I use their lines in the back of the riser as a reference point, the limbs are centered. If I use the stabilizer as a reference point, the limbs are off slightly. Usually, in my experience, many people will say, oh, my bow's aligned, and they'll do it this way. Well, when I use the stabilizer as a reference, it brings everything into a line. The stabilizers are aligned, the limbs are aligned, the riser is aligned, everything's aligned, and it shoots much better, it's quieter, less vibration that way too. So I'm going to shift things around and make the adjustments happen. And because I don't want to ruin anything, and this is somebody else's riser, I'm going to quick check how to adjust the limb stuff. I believe I will need to adjust and loosen the brass. Yeah, I gotta crack the brass thing free and then remove the locking screws here and then adjust. So it'll be very similar to the win stuff. It's adjustable here with wrenches. I just have to loosen up the centerpiece first. I'm sure many people watching were like, hey, before you string anything, you should probably loosen those things if you're going to do limb alignment adjustments. If you thought that, you're ahead of the game. I probably should have done that. I'm going to use the hardware and the tools included because I want to see how the machining is on these and the tolerances, because some can be pretty shoddy and you could round out the head of the bolts much easier. So we'll see. I don't suspect that's going to be an issue. Just give it a quarter turn. Definitely not the best fitment in the world. These weren't even tight from the factory. So if you're going to get one of these bows, you absolutely must verify that all your hardware is tight. I haven't touched this one yet, and it was a quarter turn from being tight. So hopefully nobody's bows vibrated in shipment and lost these little grub screws. That one was not tight, but barely finger snug. So it's just something to note. Not extremely important. It's not a killer, but you got to make sure things are tight and set before you do any serious shooting with this. Okay, now I get to get into the gritty of aligning the limbs. I'm going to use their Allen wrenches. Yeah, even the mechanism to adjust the limbs, not tight either. So you gotta be sure that everything is snug before you shoot. Alright, so just as I suspected, super easy to adjust the limbs because it's the same adjustment system that I love. You move the dovetail with Allen wrenches, super quick and fast. That was less than 5 minutes. Everything is aligned now. So just as I also suspected, I take the string, put it in the center of the stabilizer, adjust the limbs, and then it brings everything centered. So now, as opposed to before, I can take the string, put it on the center of the riser, the limbs are centered, and now the stabilizer is also centered too. So I always use my stabilizer as a reference, check the limbs, adjust the limbs to the stabilizer, and that will bring the riser into alignment. You can have the riser and the limbs and the string in alignment and not have the stabilizer aligned. I don't know why, it doesn't make sense. I've never been able to align my bow using the riser as a reference, whether the back side of the riser down here, the limb pockets, the limb alignment marks that they have on this bow. Either way, I can't get it to align, but when I use my stabilizer as a reference, I have no issues. Now I'm good to go, and everything is all centered. Oh, I'm gonna lock everything down. The adjusters themselves are tight, and so I'm gonna put these grub screws back in and make sure they're tight. Again, because they were not tight from the factory, before you do any shooting, and even before you align the limbs or snap the limbs in, go in there and tighten this hardware up, because the 2 screws that were touching against the block, that brass block, weren't tight. So it's going to shift slightly every time you string and unstring, and I don't want any unnecessary wear to be happening to your riser. They say that the risers are assembled and aligned one by one, and so if you have straight limbs, you should not need to set the alignment. I'm going to disagree with that, because limbs are always different. They're not perfect. There's too many issues with the limbs out there from manufacturer to manufacturer, so I won't agree with that. And I want to say they weren't aligned because it wasn't tight. If it was tight, I'd say it was aligned by somebody that knows what they're doing. So I don't know. Take that information for what you want. It's not. They weren't tight. I don't know. I don't think it would have moved because the 6mm screw on the inside was tight, but the adjustment hardware, the tightening mechanism, and the adjustment hardware was not even snug. So I don't know if it was aligned or not. It may have been, but not 100%, at least to my standard. So where the limbs come, you can go 4 pounds in to 5 turns out. 4 turns in to 5 turns out. That's a bit confusing, because what if you got a used riser, you know? How do you know where somebody had it set? I wish they would just give you how many turns out from bottom. Don't know if you can even reach bottom with this system. I'm not sure. But it looks like minimum is when you can still see the limb bolt through this brass bushing where you can see the screw coming through. If it's too far out, you'll be able to see the end of the bolt, and you can't go that far out. Doesn't tell you specifically how to adjust the weight, but there's just a scrub screw on the side that you have to crack free, and then you can adjust this, and then you tighten it back down. So it looks like that it doesn't come with the lock screws in it. That's what those extra screws are. Those are the actual locking grub screws for the limb bolt. Yeah, so that's interesting. I didn't expect that. I would expect them to come with the locking mechanism in. So there's these 2 brass scrub screws that are for the lock on the limb bolt. So these 2 little brass scrub screws right here are what go in the side, one of the sides, to hold the limb bolts in place from vibrating loose. But I'm going to guess that these little rubber things here put enough pressure on there to make sure that they don't come loose anyway. There you go. Okay, here's the adjustment. You loosen the brass grub screw. You have to loosen these on each side to allow it to move. It says you should unstring it first to do large adjustments. So I'm going to do that. And because I'm unstringing it, I'm going to tighten the limb adjusters as well. I can't get my limbs out. So I'm going to assume that the locks that go through and touch it are very close to the adjustment or the limb dovetail itself. Doesn't say that you shouldn't tighten them tight. It says to tighten them. So now that I have them tightened, I can't get my limbs out of the bow. So I either tightened them too much or I did something wrong, but I can't get them out. So I'm going to have to loosen everything up and see what I did wrong. Yeah, it's not something I've experienced before. That's weird. So all I had to do was loosen the lock grub screws. Nope. It looks like it loosened the lock grub screws and the adjustment grub screws as well. Because now, as I do this, it's got some play to it. I've not seen this before, and I'm gonna have to keep playing with this. So with the locks snug again, now it won't move, but it's just, I don't understand personally. It's just the locking grub screws. So I'm gonna take those out. So I have a lot of play without the locking grub screws, and now the adjusters are loose again, but I had them snug as if I were aligning my win and win because it's the same movement, and it's loose again. So I don't know. I'll keep playing. I'm gonna snug up the bolt in the center. I'm not gonna tighten it, but I'm gonna snug it up because maybe I had it too loose, and that's allowing the thing to shift around a little bit. But I'm gonna do a quarter turn like they suggest, and it's really loose. I don't know. We'll keep playing. Yeah, with the screws tight, how I would tighten them, I can't get the limb out. They're not even that tight. They're just barely snug. Snug to me. I don't know what's going on. And now with them just loose, I can get the limb out. Hey, thanks for watching. If you like this video, consider hitting the like button, the subscription button, and the notification bell. And if you're interested in supporting my channel, head to my website, jkaminski.com, where you can find information on Patreon, apparel, books, and digital coaching as well.